This episode is brought to you by Portland Distro. If you like underground music, movies, and more, go to portlanddistro.com for licensed merch, vinyl, CDs, and more. Plug in the discount code 10OFF, TENOFF, for a 10% discount at portlanddistro.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Everything Went Black podcast. This week, author Eddie McNamara joins us. We talk about a host of things, the least of which is his brand new novel, Brooklyn Hardcore. We talk about mental health, trauma, and New York City, specifically Brooklyn, in the early 90s. Eddie was introduced to me by Necro Co-Host and old friend Mike Scondotto, who has a cameo of sorts in Eddie's novel, Brooklyn Hardcore. Before we get going, I want to shout out the other horsemen of the podcasting apocalypse. Kicking the week off, we have Brandon Legion with Horror Wolf 666. Next up, Jackie Smith brings us into the necrosphere, the finest metal podcast on the internet. Of course, Wednesday, midweek, is Everything Went Black. I return with Necromaniacs alongside Mike Scondotto and Jeff Kashid. To round out the end of the work week, we have Spitball Media, formerly known as Break the Apocalypse, hosted by Mike Scondotto's brother, John Draper. Saturday, we take off. Sunday, Carl Hikara delivers Soul Knox for all things weird, macabre, and esoteric. Now, lurking in the shadows, a man who cannot be limited by a specific schedule, we have Iblis Manifestations, brought to you by Cheyenne of the Mighty Trivax. Please share this episode if you care. Follow us on social media and tell your friends about the show. Word of mouth is always good. Leaving a review, a star rating, helps as well. Another way you can help is by joining the Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can contribute to the show, and it gives you access to all the bonus material, and we've got a bunch of stuff going on. For $5 a month, you get the bonus material as well as early access to the shows, and for $25 a month, you can be a sponsor. I'd also like to welcome aboard our brand new Patreon members, Kevin and Marius. Welcome aboard, and I hope you guys have fun. We've got a lot of stuff in store for you. So welcome to the show, Eddie. It's really cool. I'm glad that Mike connected us. Mike and I have been friends, probably not as long as you guys have, but we worked together on the Necromaniacs podcast, and big fan of his various bands, and really solid guy.
Yeah, he's excellent. I've known him probably since 1991, I guess. He's super solid dude. Like in the book, actually, I mentioned, there's no Brooklyn Hardcore without Mike Scondotto and Kevin McCormick. So yeah, that's the God's honest truth.
Well, the main topic that I wanted to talk about was your brand new book, which is currently available. Am I correct?
Yeah, it came out August 14th. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Barnes and Noble. It's anywhere books are sold. A couple of bookstores are carrying it. The place on St. Mark's, Village Works, and a spot in Brooklyn called the Bookmark Shop. But it's not in as many brick and mortar bookshops, but it's it's available on Amazon.
Yeah, it's hard, competing for shelf space and all that stuff. It's it's well, the volume of material that's out there, getting your spot on the shelf must be challenging.
Yeah, especially as an indie. I'm coming from an indie publisher, and it's you know, uh, bookstores don't necessarily want to take a shot on sort of unknown commodities, especially something that's tied to a subculture or not I don't have a proven track record of best-selling mysteries, so it's they have to make a living too, the bookstore. So I get it.
Well, the name of the book's called Brooklyn Hardcore, and it's a punk rock noir, which I like. I like that sort of subgenre tag. I like that.
Yeah, it's something I've been wanting to do for a really long time. I really thought there are all these great sort of Jim Thompson, James Ellroy, noir stories, and I kind of wanted to marry that with if it's like a gang story or a juvenile delinquent story, like a '50s story, maybe marry that with like a '90s hardcore crew, which is something I was around a bit. So that and that's where I got that inspiration, and I thought it would be a good combination of things.
So if just for the readers out there who are listening to the show, just summarize what this book is about. Basically, it's what takes place in the '90s, right?
Yeah, in the early '90s. It's 1994, but that's kind of a stand-in from anywhere between 1990 and 1994, and it's about this kid Jimmy Quinn. He's a boxer. He's a Golden Gloves boxer. He lives in Brooklyn, and he's part of this hardcore crew called the Graveyard Stompers. And I took that from a Meteor song. I thought that was a great name, and it sort of sounds like a '50s gang. And he's a boxer. He's in this crew. They kind of there's a younger kid. He's 18, and his best friend is Skinhead Carlos. And there's a younger kid. This mob guy asked them to look out for. Like, the kid's dad died, and he was kind of like a small, weak kid. So they just sort of introduced this kid to hardcore, and the way I really wanted to do it was with a real story of a confusion show at the Crazy Country Club it was a show that took place in 1992, and I think it was spring of '92, but in the book it's '94, and it was just it was just kind of one of those epic shows. You're talking about. I'm talking about 31 years later. So I wanted to put that in there. I think it was Starkweather, Confusion. Who else was on there? Maybe Marauder was on there, and it was just this epically insane show where just the wildest things were happening inside and outside. So I was like, I got to put this in a book. So make that happen.
Yeah, Rennie's also a good friend from Starkweather.
Oh,
He's a great guy, man. That dude is like a wealth of knowledge, and we reference him a lot on Necromaniacs as our quality control manager, because he's one of these guys who recommends things for us to talk about, and also will give a running commentary on some of the things that we've talked about, not publicly, but on our little thread that we have. So he's like a great storyteller, and also someone who has a wealth of knowledge on music and books and movies and all sorts of stuff.
And just seeing that band in '92 being 15 or 16 years old, and seeing them without knowing them. I didn't go. I knew the Brooklyn bands that were playing the show, but I didn't know Starkweather. And it just my head kind of exploded. I was just seeing what was possible in a sort of extreme music band, and how melodic it was at times, and then how it would take this deathy turn, and it just really was kind of for any time. I mean, you listen to Starkweather now, it's still ahead of its time, and it was just but in the early '90s, it was just wild to witness something like that.
The early '90s, in hardcore music, I mean, I'm not like the biggest hardcore fan, honestly. It's I was into that period, pretty much exclusively, and like maybe stuff from the 80s. And I just sort of lost interest in it. I mean, I'm more into like metal and, stuff
Right.
like that. But yeah, that time was interesting because, coming out of the 80s, it was like the, the original style, late 70s or 80s,
Right.
original style. And then in the 90s, there was all this like cross pollination with other styles of music. And I feel like the music got really progressive without losing any of its power. There were bands like Integrity from Cleveland. There's bands
Yeah.
like Starkweather from Philly. Rorschach was another band from
Yeah.
Jersey. And there was like a very creative thing, Absolution was another band I would come to mind, or Die 116, maybe a little bit
Yeah.
later on. Burn, bands like that really were trying to bring something new to the subculture. And then I think, what was it, like 95, 96, 97, that Youth Crew thing started again, and things kind of
Yeah.
took a big step back in a
Yeah.
weird way.
It kind of did, like, it was very weird that kids were nostalgic for 1987 in like 1995, but they
Yeah.
were. And that happened. And I was around for it, and it was really weird. But I agree with you. I like the negative 90s, I call it, the
Yeah.
sort of the neglect, and the confusion and the dark side and that type of stuff. That was, in a way, I also, I'm a metal guy first and foremost, and I got into hardcore from metal, and to me it just like seemed like very heavy metal. Like it was,
Yeah.
it was like the next place to go from, there was like, thrash, and then thrash became, death metal, black metal, and I didn't see a difference in hardcore. Like, I didn't understand that, the Cro-Mags were not a metal band. I thought they were just like a super intense metal band. And so I just thought it was like hardcore metal when I first started going to shows. And it took me a while to get into, Minor Threat and the more punky, like Youth of Today and stuff. And I had a hard time with like the very positive, the original Youth Crew bands, which was, I just didn't, it didn't resonate as what I thought, hardcore was. And I guess now I would say it's kind of like street metal, right? That like early 90s hardcore sound is very more than crossover. I think it's almost entirely in the realm of metal. But there was, there was the attitude was not a metal attitude. I think it was a more DIY, more punk attitude. But the music, it's almost interchangeable.
Funny, Cro-Mags and Agnostic Front, like there's like their first albums for both of those bands were definitely more like in that punk, like hardcore sort of vibe. But then each of their second records, or for example, Best Wishes by Cro-Mags, it's
Right.
a thrash album. And then Cause for Alarm by Agnostic Front, I mean, it was written by basically, Pete Steele, the
Yeah,
legend,
exactly.
and that's the first Agnostic Front record I heard was Cause for Alarm. And I was listening to like Slayer and Metallica and Exodus and that sort of stuff at the time. And when someone played me that, and I was like, oh yeah, I can get behind this. This is like guitar solos and like, the drums with these like super thrashy, beats and everything like that. And I was like, oh yeah, metal and hardcore, like they're very similar, but then culturally they're completely different though. You know what I mean? You
Yeah,
go to a hardcore show and then you go to a metal show, and they're like night and day, really. You know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely. And especially at that time too. I think it was, in the early 90s, there was such, amongst hardcore people, there was such a, not everyone, but there was a almost a, like, people turned their backs on metal. Like they grew up as metal kids and they lived their whole lives as metal kids, and then all of a sudden, they they decided that they were gonna, punch long haired kids in the head for no reason. And that was lame. And it was, but it was a definitely, and musically, again, like, if you're at a Biohazard show and you're like, trying to like hit a metalhead, that's a metal band as far as I'm concerned. So it's I don't know, it's a little goofy.
Yeah. So this is the backdrop for Brooklyn hardcore. This sort
Yeah.
of world, this more intense kind of negative vibe, and then this it's almost like the Lords of Flatbush in like the mid 90s, early to mid 90s, I guess,
Yeah,
right?
like that's the kind of thing I think,
Yeah.
like the Richard Price's Wanderers is something
Yeah.
that inspired it. And a little bit sort of like Train Spotting, where it's like it's a group of people in a certain time. And so it's South Brooklyn, it's the early 90s, and these kids are, they're not necessarily good people. They're sort of like, you know thugged out hardcore kids, and they're very violent. And there's but it's like one of those things where it's the city in the early 90s was very violent. There were 2,400 murders a year, and I think there were 400 last year. So it was much more violent than the world now. So I think it was important to make the characters sort of reflective of the time. Like it's the AIDS years, it's the crack years, it's it just kids are just getting robbed all over the place for JanSports and sneakers. And I incorporated a lot of that because that was like where I lived. If I had to go to a show, I had to get back to Marine Park, Brooklyn, which is like a bus to a train. And if I'm getting back, if I'm going back from like L'Amour's or the Crazy Country Club, I'm taking the bus from Bensonhurst, and I'm gonna get fucked with by Guidos. And if I'm coming in from the city, I might have to take the train at the junction, and I'm gonna get some hoodie kids are gonna push up on me. So it was, I used a lot of that as inspiration for the book, to make it at least feel authentic. And I think a lot of people that resonated with them, as much as anything, the sort of atmosphere of the early 90s.
Also, just the difference between like downtown shows at like CB's or something, or ABC No Rio, versus like shows that might have taken place out at L'Amour's too. I mean, there's definitely a difference, in those atmospheres as well.
Yeah, I think like an ABC No Rio show was punk kids, and a show at say Bond Street or the Wetlands or CB's in sort of the mid 90s, and it was people who were they were seeing kids. They were whereas in Brooklyn, like there was maybe half of it was seeing kids, but then the other half are people who were just there for the chaos, I think. And I knew a lot of people like that. They weren't, I mean, they knew the records and stuff, and they knew the bands, but they they were there to get into a fight. They were there to get into like some kind of boot party, and that was like a, there's always some element of that when you have a bunch of like disgruntled young men and alcohol and drugs. But it was especially prevalent then.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of paint a picture of the backdrop of the book, and that's like stuff that might be alien to some people these days because, just let's face it, just things aren't as intense as they were back, 30 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. It's a much more civilized society we live in now than sort of the East Coast of the United States in the early 90s was a much less civilized place than it is now.
So who published this book? How'd that come about?
Okay, so St. Rooster Books published it, and they're a horror publisher upstate, and the publisher is Tim Murr. He's a super cool dude. He's a punk rocker. He was really behind it. He loved it. And that came about through, well, okay, so I had a publishing deal with a different publisher, and it was great. Everything was going really well. It was a publisher I liked. I liked the books they put out, and then kind of like he decided that he wanted to be an imprint that was anti-woke, and I don't know what that is really, and I didn't really want to be a part of something. I didn't want to be signing on to some kind of political agenda. So I asked to pull the book, and he was really cool about it, and I did. And then a friend of mine, Heather Buckley, a filmmaker, she said, I was explaining the situation, and she said, "Oh, my friend Tim is a publisher. He'd be into what you're doing." So I sent it, and he read it. It took him like a couple of months, but he was gave me a deal right there, and it was like a pretty good deal for me actually. A better deal than the other one actually, and I didn't even have to negotiate. He just made me like a super cool offer, and that, yeah, it worked out really well. It kind of fell in my lap through a friend, but that's what happened there. Yeah, there was no real drama getting this deal.
Now, how was the editorial process on this? I mean, most some people don't realize that an author writes a book and it's not just this one monolithic stream of consciousness that comes out. There's also like an editorial component to it where you have an editor and, you know, they go through and make recommendations. Like, how is that? Like, how close is the final version of the book to, say, your manuscript?
I'd really different. I'd say the original, the book is 225 pages. The original manuscript was probably like 600, and I just went on in different tangents. Like there was a whole relationship tangent, there was a whole more of like a mob tangent, and I went in a lot of different directions with modern things, and it seemed a little unfocused. And you know, the editor was able to focus me more, and you know, stick with the the flowing story of like the Graveyard Stompers crew. They kill a Nazi, and there's repercussions, and then it comes 20 years later, like in almost like the current world. So that was like the through line I was using instead of all these tangential things. So we did it was a lot of was done in editing. You know, I think I have 3 other books based on the other stuff I was writing, but for this one we really yeah, we really sort of narrowed the scope of it to, you know, this one story. It's much easier to follow.
Yeah, that'd be cool if you could have like this series that's sort of in the, you know, your universe, your Brooklyn hardcore universe, you know.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I have to stop killing people off, but I think that might you know, that might not be the worst idea. You know, I do have a few published short stories in you know, in like literary crime journals, and it deals with this sort of you know, this time and place, and these type of people. So yeah, I guess there is a BKHC universe out there.
Richard Price and crime and all that. So is that like that genre, that crime genre? Is that you know, primarily what you? I know your other book is not a crime book, but like, is that the direction that you think you're going with in your writing career?
Yeah, I think so. I think crime, possibly true crime, but I do like crime fiction, like especially literary crime fiction, or really you know, powerful old pulp. You know, yeah, I really love that stuff. It's, you know, I read it for enjoyment, and I tear through these books. I'll sit down and just, you know, blaze right through it. So that's where I feel comfortable doing that. You know, because like I like a story about the bad guys, you know, and it's kind of hard to do that with you know, with traditional literary fiction, where, you know, you just really can't do that. You have to write like a beautiful sentence story about, you know, a divorce between you know, upper middle class people and writers, or something like that. So, you know, I'm much more interested in, you know, darker things, and bad characters. So that's, you know, I think crime and horror are where I'm gonna, you know, find the spot.
You think you have a couple horror stories in you too?
Yeah, my wife and I actually, we just started something, and it's I'm really excited about it. She's a writer. She's been a magazine writer for forever, and she's a freelance writer now, and we're actually working on a horror piece that's sort of what would I say? It's a satanic panic piece, and you know, it takes place at that time, and it's sort of about a true crime podcaster who takes on a satanic panic case and gets the person out of jail. You know, like gets you know, lawyers into it, and the person is freed, and then the repercussions of that.
That
And
was that a novel, or like a novella, or like what, you know, is that sort of thing?
yeah, it's gonna be a novel, probably on the shorter end of a novel, probably, you know, around 225 pages type of thing. You know, like I like them quick. I don't want to go on forever with you know, I like these quick stories, and just you know, stay with the one focus.
How much do you outline your work? You know, it's you know, different authors have different processes for doing their work. You know, so are you an outline guy and you fill in sort of everything, or you know, how's that work for you?
I am. I'm an outline guy, and I'm a notebook guy, like an actual, you know, a pen and a little pocket notebook guy, and I'll sort of sit there. I'll have lunch, and I'll take notes about scenes that I really think need to be included in this book, and sort of then that becomes the outline, and then the outline sort of becomes unwieldy. Then it starts, it's so it'll be an outline, but there'll be like paragraphs of notes, and it's and I can buzz through a whole notebook with just what I'm gonna do in 200 pages. I can outline a whole notebook in that, and just have to be not precious about cutting things that that don't fit the story, that aren't serving the story, no matter how cool it is. Like there's a lot of things I want to include in Brooklyn Hardcore, but if it wasn't serving the story, I decided I would cut it.
So with that said, like that, yeah, you probably were pretty good with notes though from your editor then, right? As far as like cutting things and all that.
Yeah, I had done recipes for magazines for a long time, and I was actually the Penthouse dating columnist for a while.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, called The Scoundrel. Yeah, it's yeah. I have a ridiculous life, and so I'm really like, and again, my wife is she's a journalist and an editor, so I'm really good with notes from an editor. I will get right on it. I will get it done. I will get it right back to them. I treat it like work. I don't treat it like something that's entirely precious, unless it's something they're completely wrong about, which will happen from time to time. And that's sort of almost like a falling out I had with the first person who was editing the book. He thought I was being too I don't know. He wanted me to use words that people back then didn't use, and it was kind of he was like, well, wouldn't they use the N-word? I'm like, no, they wouldn't. And and that kind of was I was just like, that's a hard no for me, because it really, that wasn't like, that's not what I'm, that's not the story I'm telling. That's not, that's not my story.
So I know that you have one other book that you have two books currently published and a bunch of short stories, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Toss Your Own Salad. What's that one all about?
Yeah,
it's got a nice catchy title to it,
Yeah, it's that's the most ridiculous thing. That's like yeah, how do I even explain that? I was well, can I backtrack a minute and do a little,
go ahead.
And do a
Please.
little okay, so I graduated college in 1998, and I with a degree in English and history, and I end up working for this newspaper group in Brooklyn, doing advertisements, and it's just like this dead end job, and I'm sleeping on my parents' couch, and there's these horrible springs, or like kind of like digging into me, and I'm like, this is just, I have to get a real job. So I took every civil service test, the fire department, U.S. Customs, sanitation, environmental protection, and I took the Port Authority police test, and I didn't know what a Port Authority police officer was, but I heard they made decent money, and it seemed like an all right job, so I took that and got called for that. So I ended up, which was really odd for me at the time. I mean, I was just like, sort of like a regular at rockabilly shows. I was playing in a rockabilly band. I played in, a ton of hardcore bands before that. And then I moved to Seagirt, New Jersey to stay at the National Guard barracks and become a Port Authority cop, which is just, it's the strangest thing. I worked at the Holland Tunnel for 2 years after that. Doing nothing really, watching traffic go by, and then 9/11 happened, and I got down there, and that was a wild, yeah, and that was like I got hired in '99, so 9/11 is, it's 2 years after, and so I got there at like just as it went down, no, a little bit after the buildings had gone down, and I stayed there until I was assigned there to rescue recovery, and I was there from September 11th to May 31st, and it was every day, like 12 or 16 or 20 hours, but usually 12, and every day for that amount of time, for 9 months, and that sort of changes your perspective on things, and
that's like, I can't even imagine what that every day must have been like a nightmare, man. That especially in that location, you know?
Yeah, and I didn't realize that at the time, but it legitimately was. It was legitimately like, you know, and I am a horror movie fan. I will watch the gorier things, and nothing, nothing can prepare you for what that's like, in real life. And you don't realize after the, it's shocking at first. It's overwhelming, and then you get used to it because it just becomes like, you clock in at 6 p.m. and you clock out at 8 a.m. and what you're doing is you're doing there was no rescue after the first day, so it's recovery. And it's sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's someone you knew, sometimes you just you pull out the wallet in a guy's pants to get his ID, and you see a picture of his family, and it just like it fucks your head up. It just and I didn't realize it until I got hit in the face with a piece of rebar from one of the grappling machines was pulling it up, and it like broke my nose, gave me a concussion, and I got a few days off. And before that, there were no days off, so I was just in the grind of this, this sort of World Trade Center grind. And then I was home, and my wife worked a 9 to 5, so she was at work, and then I was at home thinking about, for the first time, kind of what was going on, because I wasn't just so exhausted to go to sleep. Before while I was working there, like you do your shift, you go home, sleep, you come back, and I had some time to think, and it really it was it was life changing. I was driving my car one day to a medical appointment to get cleared to go back to work, and I felt like I was dying, and I didn't realize it then, but it was I thought I was having a heart attack, and I felt like I was veering, on the FDR, and it was a panic attack. It was my first panic attack, and first of many, and and that was like maybe like January or February of '02, and and something had totally changed in me when I went back. I was not even that early on, just a few months, I was already different. And as the years went on, I did the thing where I pretended like nothing was happening and just sort of like tough it out and stick through it. And that was probably the worst thing to do, because I didn't seek treatment or help until 2005, and that was a mistake, because I think I developed some some safety behaviors and got used to a certain level of misery and panic attacks that I could have probably avoided if I had, in 2002, after having that panic attack, decided to speak to a qualified therapist.
Well, the culture that we live in, especially, we're going back, 20 some odd years, getting help for that sort of thing was not really in the discussion with a lot of people, and it's easier said than done, I guess, back then,
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just like, and then like, it's just like, I was not a therapy person. And then I was like, on top of it, they had like group therapy, but it was like with other cops, and it's like with your boss. So like, if I'm with my boss, I'm with anybody from work. I'm not saying anything. I'm just like, everything's great. Yeah. Tons of overtime. Maybe I could put a down payment on a place. Like just like these, like, really rote, corny answers. But, and now I know, later, that everybody was sort of faking it in the same way. Like everyone who was in the room, we had these mandatory group therapy sessions, all these guys, and they were all doing this like tough guy front. But now, I talked to them and we text, and, we were all like, people were saying like, oh, I can't believe that Mac is so chill. Like, that guy's really got under control. And I was just like, I felt like I was falling apart, and I thought they were the ones who were, sort of like held together. And yeah, it's with the, we had construction guys, and they were, they weren't going to start opening up either. And they were going through the same stuff. They were working the same, they were doing the same job as us. And it was, it took a lot of years until people got comfortable. I guess culturally, I think it took really the probably the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, with those guys coming back with PTSD and needing treatment, for other people to even consider that they might have something similar, and they might also need treatment.
Now, how did you locate the resources to help you get through this? Like that, in 2005, was it like on your own, or was it something through the Port Authority Police Department, or, a city thing?
Yeah, well, at first I was living in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and I just looked at the closest person to me, and there was a therapist like 2 blocks away from me, and I went to that guy because I didn't want work to know yet, and he was worse than useless. So that was so then I did let work know that I was having issues, and then they had set me up with the counselor, and then there was what the government actually did something really great. There was the World Trade Center medical monitoring program, and they have it in Bellevue. There's a few in Brooklyn. There's one uptown. They're all over the place. Some in Jersey, and they have a fully staffed program where you go for a yearly medical exam. They do a full physical, lung test, X-ray on your lungs, and they do a psychological. And they set me up with a therapist who was actually, helpful for me. I could say that that was, and by that point I had retired from. I was able to retire due to 9/11, and I was set up with this therapist, and he was actually helpful, and everything I sort of thought that I thought it was like, because the first guy I went to in Brooklyn on my own was a bullshit guy, and we were just trying to deal with symptoms, and he asked me to tell him about a day, just like a work day, and I did, and the dude started crying on me, and and I just felt like such a weird freak that I was like, I got to keep this to myself. I can't talk about this to people. This is really, and I think he kind of, a bad therapist, man. That's you got to watch out for those ones.
Was there any kind of like medication involved in any of these, this therapy, or was it all just
Yeah,
talk therapy?
I did talk therapy. I did the first one was I did CBT, and then I went to talk therapy where I actually talked about the things I didn't want to talk about. But yes, medication from 2005. I've been on SSRIs since 2005, and I've been on benzos since 2005, and much less on the benzos now. I've weaned off a lot, and but I'm still on an SSRI, but I've had to sort of tweak that over the course of the last almost 20 years. But yeah, I still am on medication, and I found that actually that definitely did something. I think just having 10 out of 10 panic attack, and just knowing that I had a Xanax that I could take. I didn't even have to take it, but just to know I had it actually really helped. And that's, with those situations. And yeah, I'm a, a lot of people have a lot of different ideas about medication, but for me, it's something that I think was very helpful.
I mean, definitely, when it's applied in the right circumstances, it's, I know people that need to be on medication because
Yeah.
there's a situation that they just can't, function without it. So, in extreme cases like this, definitely it's not, it's something that would be required, I imagine.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it was, it's like, I wouldn't have left my apartment if it was just just sort of my symptoms. I would have just stayed in my apartment, and I got a small pension, and I would have just tried to hustle, a job from home, and whatever I could do. And but what was good is the therapist I was working, the talk therapist I was working with, my wife, again, she's something else. She's really great, and she was like, look, I'm going to come to your therapy with you once, and I want to meet your therapist, and I want to know what the plan is, because I want you to get better. And so it was after I was retired, and what she had done for me was she put me in culinary school, because that's something I always wanted to do, but I didn't sort of have the confidence to do it. And she put me in culinary school, and so then afterwards I ended up with like a private chef job. so that was kind of like just like you go to somebody's house and cook. That was pretty easy. And but she was like, I want you to do more. Like, I want you to be creative. And so her and the therapist held me to say three things I wanted to do. And and complete those. So like they could have been anything. So I said, okay, so three things. I want to take a writing class, I want to start a food blog, and I want to cook 2 days a week at the soup kitchen, Holy Apostles. It's the biggest in New York. And I did it. And those three things absolutely changed my life.
Wow. That's that's actually one of the things I was going to ask you is how you got into writing, and I guess this is like the the beginning of that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, I always was. I think the first thing when I was a kid, like other kids wanted to be like Darryl Strawberry, or Dwight Gooden, or like Eddie Van Halen, and I was like, who wrote the Twilight Zone? I want to be that guy. I was like Rod Serling. I just was like blown away by like I thought the guy was a genius. So I was a big reader as a kid, and then I did a fanzine with Justin Brennan from Indecision about extreme music. It was called Extreme Zine with an X. It was the early '90s, and it was about bands in Brooklyn who we thought were not getting enough sort of play anywhere. Like people weren't talking about what was happening in Brooklyn. So he was in Indecision. I was in this band Purge. Mike was in Confusion. There was Rich Darkside. We interviewed them. We had Confusion. We had Darkside in there. We had probably like Step Aside and our own bands, and we would do Brooklyn show reviews. So I was writing. That was in high school. So yeah, Justin and I were doing that then, and then Mike Scondotto again came on in the second issue in 1994, and he brought a lot more the death metal stuff, and that was really that was kind of interesting. But I was always even when I was a cop, I co-wrote a couple of screenplays with and I knew someone who was making the films, so I was always into that. But I kind of needed a class. I needed the structure of how to actually go about writing short stories. And I thought that's what I wanted to do was the the short stories. And the blog was just I was a private chef. I was developing recipes, and I was like, well, why don't I just develop some recipes on this blog? And then I went ahead and did that, and that kind of took off. And that was Toss Your Own Salad. That was the name of the blog, and it was like this I would kind of do jokey. It was like this real jokey kind of ridiculous style of writing, but the recipes were good. And yeah, and that kind of took off. And I wasn't even looking for a book deal, but an editor from St. Martin's Press emailed me for a meeting, and I showed up. He's like, "Oh, come for a meeting at the what's that? It was like at the Flatiron Building," and it's like I'm in some office in the Flatiron Building, and there's a guy offering me a book deal. I didn't know why I was there, and I'm like, "Yeah, sure, yeah, let's do it, yeah." And it was that was like a really random but awesome moment, and and that goes back to my therapy session of, yes, I want to take a writing class, yes, I want to do a food blog, and the soup kitchen. The soup kitchen, I didn't become a professional soup kitchener, but it was I think it's a good thing to do.
So that's what the Toss Your Own Salad book is, like a collection of those blog entries. Is that what that is?
Well, I got the deal off the blog entries, and like maybe a third of it are the old blog entries, and then I was just I sort of had, they gave me an advance, and they were like, you have like a year to come up with 100 new recipes, and and make the write-ups funny, and make it appealing to people who, it's a vegetarian cookbook, and like make it appealing to sort of like tattooed moms, and and that's kind of that's kind of what ended up happening. So um which was and it's on a it's on a big four publisher, and I ended up in like People magazine, and like it was a weird trip. I wasn't expecting to go that route. I didn't think that, like, if you asked me at 19 years old, would I be a cookbook author in People magazine and on TV with Lydia, I didn't think that would have happened. But it's we reinvent ourselves in this life. It's a long process.
Now, some of the recipes are they some of them meatless or vegan or meat? What's the like? Is it a cross section of different types of eating, or is it specific to anything?
Well, it's all vegetarian, and
Okay,
most of it's vegan, but not all of it. And it's kind of eclectic recipes, and it's like I would say like one of some of the base is Mediterranean cooking or Italian cooking, but I tried to get a little interesting with it, where I would do like a tikka masala pasta sauce, and sort
that's
of do
good.
that with and it's just like it just fucking works. It's just say it's just kind of like a city mashup of like anybody like the kind of food you would get as takeout. Like how do you make it at home, and how do you make it vegetarian?
I should pick that up because I'm always looking new twists
Oh yeah,
in my cooking.
I'll hook you up for one. I think it's like out of print right now. I think we sold
Oh
out.
wow, okay.
Yeah, I think we sold out like it's like sometimes it pops up on Amazon and sometimes it's available on some of the used sites, but it's like weirdly out of print. Like we went through
Really?
we went through the first run, but they didn't do a second run of it. So
Huh.
yeah, it's weird economics when you're on a big publisher like that. It's a whole different thing. The expectations are gigantic. Whereas now I'm on an indie publisher, and it's the expectation is like my publisher is happy when we're talking about numbers. He's like, book's doing great. People are buying the book, and you know that's really nice to hear, because the other way it's like everything is terrible, and you only sold this many today, even though the numbers are much bigger the other way. It's just it's a completely different. I guess it's like kind of like a band being on a major label versus an indie. I guess it's a similar type thing with the expectations.
Oh, how I heard that like Amazon reviews actually help quite a bit with smaller publishers and that kind of thing.
They do, and if anyone listening to this has read my book, whether you liked it or didn't like it, please leave an Amazon review for me. They do, because then once you hit a certain amount on Goodreads and Amazon, more people start seeing your book as a recommended book. So I have a strange thing that's happened, and the people who are very enthusiastic about my book are people who come from a music scene background, or people who are interested in New York in that time period, but they're not necessarily people who read crime fiction books. So yeah, that would the more Amazon reviews, the more the crime fiction people, the people who are reading like Elmore Leonard, I want them to see that this thing exists too.
Yeah, so that's the thing I want to make clear to everybody is that even though this does take place in like a music background, like the setting is within a hardcore scene, it's very much a crime fiction book. It's not about like what band some guy's in or that kind of thing.
Right, right. That's like the catalyst, and like sort of the background of the characters. But yeah, that's not the main focus of it. It's a crime story, and it's a bleak noir crime story, and I think that's the focus of it. And I think it's interesting because I know people who bought it for like people will email, I get emails all the time. People are like, like chapter 3 was awesome. Like it was like they're like they love the nostalgia aspect of it, and then like, but then I got to attach your characters, and I couldn't put the thing down, and I can't believe this happened. And so that's that's like the best feeling in the world, to have somebody like read your book and then want to discuss it with you over find you on social media and then want to discuss it over over messages. I think that's the coolest.
I got to make sure Rennie knows about this because he's a big crime reader as well as a horror reader. Like he's
Well, his band's in the book. His they're in there. They're they are mentioned, and there's a little bit of a Starkweather review. So yeah, please do.
Yeah, definitely going to make sure that he knows about this because, like I said, he and I always, we exchange a lot of weird fiction stuff, a lot of horror, a lot of like I like reading crime fiction myself, like you mentioned Richard Price and, Jim Thompson and, that sort of stuff is like, I read a fair amount of that, but Rennie is like I would say he's 50-50 with like horror and crime or crime writing. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's, yeah, then, yeah, you might want to check it out because it really, yeah, it is. I mean, I think it's a noir. It's a hardcore noir. If that's a thing, this is it. And yeah, I think it's really rooted in that. I mean, it's a fatalistic book. It's and there's mob stuff. There's sort of petty crime stuff. There's gang stuff. And I think it's and I think it's way more of a crime book than a say a hardcore book or a 90s New York book. I think, if I had to classify it.
Yeah, no, that absolutely. So, anyone out there who's like into crime, definitely check it out. Do you have any kind of social media presence that you want to talk about? Like where people can maybe follow you, get updates on the book and anything that's, any other forthcoming material you might have being published?
Yeah. I have a, Instagram. It's at Toss Your Own Salad. One word, Toss Your Own Salad. And I am Eddie McNamara on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter, but like I don't ever use it. So like
X.
yeah, X, yeah. So yeah, so like either Facebook or Instagram would be a good place to find me and link up.
Well, thanks a lot, Eddie. Guys out there, if you're into this kind of thing, definitely check it out. I'm going to post a link along with this episode to the Amazon where you can purchase this book, and definitely keep your eye out for it. And I'd like to thank you for being generous of your time, Eddie. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you for letting me come on the show.
All right, cheers. Thanks a lot. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.